We're going to be talking a little bit more about housing standards that are dictated to us, what the government are doing to supposedly improve housing standards in the UK and what that practically means.
And also what the government and say the councils don't tell you.
What is the difference between a housing standard and a building regulation?
Yeah, so building regulation is how something is physically built and it sort of functions for that purpose.
What happens is that the pounds per square metre is high versus your value per square metre. If it's costing you more to build than it is to sell, you physically aren't going to build it. There's no more simple economics than that. Like, you're looking at it going, this is madness. Hi everyone. Just before we get going with today's podcast, just a quick announcement that our book is now live on Amazon. Like, you go and search for Financial Freedom at BDRR, you'll find a book that describes the mindset, strategies, systems that we've put together to deliver over 50 projects in 5 years. We launched it in 2025 and it went to number 1 in 3 separate categories on the bestseller list. So hopefully you'll find some real good value out of it. And just one more time, Financial Freedom, BDRR on Amazon.
Yeah, the BDR evolution is changing again.
Well, that's the full title. If you want to be picky. Yeah, go and find it. Hi folks, and welcome back to the Financial Freedom Podcast. Today on the show, we're going to be talking through one of our technical episodes, and it's all about housing standards, or more importantly, the hidden truths about housing standards, what no one actually tells you. Now, as always, with my technical episodes, I've got my podcast co-author, is that the right thing?
Co-author,
co-host,
yeah.
Timothy Witt. Hi, Tim.
Hello, thanks for having me again.
Now,
Great to be here.
Just before we crack on, if you haven't already liked, subscribed, or turned the notifications on whatever platform you're looking at, right, or listening to us for this podcast, please do so now. That'll keep you informed for all of the latest episodes. There's only about 11% of people that have actually done this. So please do take a moment just to like, subscribe, or turn those notifications on. Now, housing standards. So just to frame this a little bit more, we're going to be talking a little bit more about housing standards that are dictated to us, right? So this is not things that you're going to set as your housing standard in terms of your brand standard or anything like that. We're talking almost exclusively about what the government are doing to supposedly improve housing standards in the UK and how they're imparting it and what that practically means, correct?
And also what the government and say the councils don't tell you or don't know about those housing standards in reality.
100%. Yeah. And the reality of it can sometimes be very, very different. So let's crack straight on. Are you ready? Right. Yeah. So question number 1, what are the things that governments and or councils doing that actually intervene with housing standards?
Right. So I'll move through a bit of a list if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
And I'll start with the planning system. So the planning system, so there's the NPPF, which is?
It's the National Planning Policy Framework, which is the bringing together of the Town and Country Planning Act into a...
Good thing I asked you, because I think you've said it better than I would have.
Yeah.
And what sits under that is called the NDSS, which is the National Described Space Standards.
Yeah, okay.
So in essence, how big a property needs to be to get planning permission and how big certain rooms in that property need to be in essence. Mm-hmm. And then in writing, black and white, and then there's also on top of that, there's opinion. But anyway, so the NDDSS, so it says, so for things like, there's a table that you can find online. So it starts off at the smallest size you can do. And this is across the country, regardless of any design or location. Mm-hmm. It needs to be a minimum of 37 square meters for one person in one studio with a shower in the bathroom. And then from there is a scale that goes up. So, 1 bed, 2 people, baths. And then, you can have like a 2-bed flat across one level, that's one size. If it's a 2-bed property across 2 levels, that's a different size, and all these sort of things. So it's fairly strict and stringent. And then also within that, there's things like bedrooms. So bedroom sizes, the single need to be 7.5 meters and 7.5 for a single occupant and 11.5 for a double occupant that sits within that as an example. So there's bits and pieces like that. So it's relatively stringent, and it doesn't factor in really that much else apart from spatial standards. So that's planning. And then if we move forward to other elements, like I said before, there is design opinion. So if you're working in a council department, they've got an opinion on design, basically. It isn't necessarily documented, but they sort of form something that's good or bad in essence. And
as we're talking about councils, what is the difference between a housing standard and a building regulation?
Yeah, so building regulation is how something is physically built and how it sort of functions for that purpose, if that makes sense. So, so building regulations, you have things like the size of stairs, the width of the doors need to be for people to escape, what fire rating walls and doors have, how fire alarms work and vents work and all these sort of things. So And building regulation, a lot of it is there for safety, and some of it is there for environmental purposes as well, and things like that. So that's the difference between regulation, and planning. And also on top of that, we got things like licensing requirements. So we do quite a lot of conversions to HMOs.
Yep.
There's also licensing requirements that are in place for that, and they are separate and different to planning requirements.
Yep.
And they really are. They sort of kind of don't interlink at all, really. And also,
Yeah, because you can have a planning standard which says one thing and a licensing standard which says another.
yes.
And it worse, you might have a licensing standard that you design something to, and then planning turn around and say, actually, that's not relevant.
Yeah, so as an example, you could be doing, say, a HMO conversion where the room sizes are all 10.22 meters, which under licensing is a double-sized room, but under the NDDS space standards, under the NPPF,
Yep.
it needs to be 11.5 meters.
Yep.
But that framework is designed for what we call a C3 dwelling, which is like a flat or a house. But sometimes councils interpret it that it doesn't matter. It's any place where someone lives, they adopt those standards. So it does get confusing from that perspective. Then we've also got, on top of that, we've got net zero requirements in essence, or environmental requirements. So if you look at things, say like EPC requirements that need to be a certain rating and size and all those sort of things.
And these are evolving again.
And they're evolving. And interesting, the EPC requirement to be a C is moved back to come in effect in 2030. And there's an election in what year?
Yeah, 2029.
2029. So that could change again depending on that election and things like that. So yeah, it is a bit of a minefield, and there is quite a bit of intervention in the market with these sort of things, I would say.
Yeah, and I think there's also the biodiversity net gain as well, which it's to do with net zero, but it's about external factors and increasing external factors. So things like increasing the shrubbery, hedgerows, trees, this type of stuff for habitat for UK wildlife, but also for general.
Yeah, so simple. If you're building a building and there's trees that have to come out, or a car park, you need to sort of add trees back in a way, or something like that.
Well, it's not even adding them back in; it's net gain.
Yeah.
So if there isn't something, they can actually put something in. So it is a net gain.
Yeah.
Some we don't do much of that though, because most of our development,
a lot of ours are conversions of existing.
Yeah. So they are exempt.
Right. There are new requirements like car parking, with EV charging points and things like that didn't used to exist. Under planning and building regulations that do now.
And I guess underwriting all of these things is a governmental intervention that is due to, and in a way right and proper, to make and ensure that we are improving standards over time. That's what its intention is.
I think that's what its intention is. Yes. So we can talk about that more in detail as to
which why wouldn't you want to improve housing standards over time? Why wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, you only need to go and see some of the older grade listed buildings that have lasted from like this 1600s in Stratford upon Avon or whatever. You can barely get through the doors, right? It's not safe.
And there's some horrible flats that are very small, not enough natural light. No human should be living in, and things like that. So I completely agree that we never want things
fires and escapes and stuff like. You don't want people.
Yeah, we don't.
So all of those things underwrite this.
Yeah.
Housing standards. However, in all things that the government do, it's not always well thought out. So there are always unintended consequences, and we are seeing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, on a day-to-day basis right here, right now. So why don't you tell me some of the things that you're seeing?
So I think the unintended consequences are it makes housing worse. Sorry, that's not the way to say it. It makes housing worse in a way. And what I mean is because of the challenges with planning, regulation, net zero, all these sort of things, it makes it harder to get a project to stack up from an investor's perspective to either convert, refurbish, build new, etc. Because basically there's no profit in it. So the best way to get housing to improve over time is to get those things to happen to the current regulations and to a good new quality. But if that's not happening, the housing in that area just stays as it is or gets worse over time because no one's investing any money into it. So I think the unintended consequence is that housing actually gets worse as a result because no one's investing a lot of money into the aspect. And also that has a wider knock-on effect to the economy. So if building works aren't happening because there's no profit involved, businesses suffer, like construction companies, all the professionals involved in those businesses, and then all of the suppliers associated, transport companies, paint suppliers, all these different wider business and economy suffer as a result. And that stops economic growth generally because, development and construction are a huge part of most economies. So if that is prevented from happening or stalled from happening, there are huge knock-on effects.
I mean,
to the economy.
it's consistently been one of the top 5 generating
Absolutely.
GBP in the UK for
Yeah.
for the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And one of the really critical things is you always know how well something's doing. I always say to myself, I always know how well we're doing when I drive towards Manchester. I can see the tower cranes.
Yes. Well, that's one of the biggest factors of economic growth is how many tower cranes are in a city. So if you see like Deloitte's and those companies do those big reports on the economy, they have a crane count in the city.
Oh, is that right?
Report, yeah.
Oh, I thought it was just me. No, there you go.
There's actually like the reports that happen about this and what that means for the city and things like that. And Manchester got featured a few years ago when I was actually working on one of the development sites because I had the most amount of cranes per capita or something in the UK at the time. That was the focus of the report, was Manchester's growth.
I just wanted to peel the onion a little bit on this.
Yeah.
So because it's okay for us to say it stops investment, but what I wanted to do is use it, like, just talk about that in a bit more detail. So why because these things, if it's good in theory, it's just the commercial part that hasn't been thought through, right?
Yeah. So if I start with a couple of things and how that leads into the commercial. So if I give you a simple example, so the NDSS says for a 2-bedroom, 2-story, either C3 dwelling, which could be a flat or a terrace or whatever, that needs to be 70 square meters.
Over two stories.
Over 2 stories.
Yep.
What would you say the average size of like a 2-bed terrace is in the UK?
I think it's probably just under 70. I would have thought.
Under 70.
66, 67.
Yeah, it's somewhere between 60 and 70 as an example. And that's a huge percentage of this population.
Yeah.
So basically what we're saying is that, and that's not even a flat, that's a terrace, which is generally you would say the smallest property is a flat, then it's a terrace, then it's other properties and things like that, bigger terraces and semi-detached, etc., detached. So what we're saying is that the minimum standard for a size for a 2-bed over 2 floors is bigger than what most people live in currently, and it's not even the lowest size of property, if that makes sense. So for that reason, what that means is if you're developing in an area where there's lots of 2-bed terraces, you're at an economic disadvantage straight away because you might as well just buy the existing one.
Well, I think there's a even more specific thing to do with that, because obviously when you build something that's bigger, it costs more to build on a fundamental level.
Yes.
And when you then add in more layers to that, when you're adding in an increased EPC requirement, increased building regulation requirement, an increased acoustic sounding requirement, all of those things are monetary, and without grants in place that can offset for profit, which is where this all comes down to, what happens is that the pounds per square meter is high versus your value per square meter.
Yes.
So if it's costing you more to build than it is to sell, you physically aren't going to build it. There's no more simple economics than that. So let's pick on the prior approval class G as an example, which is you can create 2 flats above a shop. Great idea. And then what they said was, but those flats have to be at least 37 square meters. And as we've already discussed, most of those areas are not that big. So then what you would find is you'd have to build out 1 flat over 2 levels, and then you still couldn't meet the space standards. So that didn't happen quite often. But then the bigger one is, because of the disasters that happened in the UK with the flats and the fire risk and all that kind of stuff, is anything over 2 stories or 3 stories, I don't know exactly what it is, needed an additional escape. So you've got these office blocks which don't need that you cannot fundamentally...
Which could have a lot more people in it as well, by the way.
Which you fundamentally cannot use now because of the fire risk regulation. So they're just sat there part full. So because they haven't come up with a way to do that without making really significant changes to the building. And the whole point of it was to make it faster, cheaper and quicker to reuse these buildings. The whole point. And then they restricted in that use. It's like, well, and then you can't add doors, you can't add windows, you can't do these things. It's just a change of use. And I'm like, well, you've made it, it's a good idea.
The general idea helps investment.
You've given it with the left hand and taken it with your right hand. So no, like, you're looking at it going, this is madness.
They've added in too many barriers. And the simple thing, like you said, is that let's say that upper floor is 60 square meters. You can't do 2 flats anymore. You can do 1.
You can only do 1. But even then, you might not meet the over 2 levels.
Yes.
Because it has to be 70 meters.
You got space above that level.
Yeah.
And
that's the problem with the one size fits all. But what are the government supposed to do? Because it's a housing standard, nationally, isn't it? It's
well, let's talk a little bit more about this cost, and then I think it's good to go back to some solutions.
How does it affect cost then? This is a separate question, isn't it? So give us the real profit versus cost versus why it's a problem.
Right. So I'll give you two examples. I'll talk about, say, something that would convert to, say, flats, and something that would convert like a house to a HMO or an office to a HMO or something like that, if that works.
Yeah.
To give you an understanding. So when we look at stuff to convert to flats and we go, right, if a one bed, depending on scope and all these sort of things, but average, there might be, say, 70 grand cost per flat for the conversion for, say, a 40 square meter flat for a base conversion. Yeah. You've got other costs associated. You've got the purchase price, you've got legal costs, you've got stamp duty, you've got professional fees, all these sort of things, finance costs, etc. So generally, when we look at it, to make a reasonable profit, and on a development like that, you probably want to have a profit of around about 20% to cover your risk and make sure you make a reasonable profit. To then get to that profit level, we know that the flat values in that area for a basic one, or like a okay spec one bed, would need to be 140 to 150 grand.
Yep.
Otherwise, financially, it doesn't work. And then across Greater Manchester, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's probably half or less than half of the areas that work or don't work.
Yeah.
So purely on economics, with the prior approval system,
Yeah.
you can't convert a commercial building to
And that comes simply down to affordability as well.
You just don't make money.
Yeah, because the mortgage rates are high, the interest rates are high, the Bank of England base rate's high. So the affordability is high, so these things aren't moving.
Yeah. Whereas without that space standard, so if you said, right, in that area, we can get exemption from the space standard, but design it effectively in that area for that demographic, that could help it work better. But anyway, we'll talk to more solutions in a second. But so my HMO example is this. So what we're finding in Greater Manchester, some of the boroughs at the moment, there is a disconnect between HMO licensing guidance, which is housing standards, but for licensing purposes, compared to housing standards or design requirements for the planning department.
Yeah.
So what we have is, and I'll name and shame, but there's a council, which is Tameside Council. So their licensing requirements, say for a 5-bed HMO, say that you could have a kitchen diner shared between 5 people at 12 square meters. You could have rooms which are double sized at 10.22 or above, and that complies with licensing. And obviously you can add en suites in and stuff like that. Generally, that sort of design actually works, and it's actually what the market wants. Tameside brought in an Article 4 direction, which we've talked about before last year, with immediate effect, which they didn't need to do. But they decided to do that for whatever reasons they had at the time, which they put forward. And then since then, they actually don't have a design policy, but the design that they're assessing the applications against is completely different to the licensing requirements.
It's the general design principles, isn't it?
It's the general design principles. So they're assessing against like what should be, say, a C3 dwelling house or a flat, even though it operates differently. It's in a different product. So they're saying, in a house, we'd expect a kitchen, a separate lounge room, and all these sort of things. And we also want double bedrooms, even though the single occupants and these sort of things. So in essence, what would have been a 5-bed HMO with good quality, with en suites and a shared kitchen dining room, now needs potentially bigger bedrooms and separate living space. So what would be a 5-bed was now basically a 4-bed in essence. So you lose, one room of income.
You lose all the economy of that room, the value.
You lose all the value of that room. And what we know from HMO residents, you can't really, in the market, you can't get a lot of extra rent for an extra living room. As much as, we want people to interact and get along and things like that, some people use it, but they don't really get used that much.
The mad thing about it is that it's the one size fits all, because they're happy with 7.5 square meter rooms with no en suites and shared bathrooms. As long as there's a separate lounge, 5 people, we could do that. But that's not what our market
But then we know that it won't rent that well.
That's literally saying, oh, well, everyone's going to be a student.
Yeah.
Or on the social end of the spectrum. Nobody's going to be the worker. Because our working professionals, they want a little bit of privacy. They want larger rooms that can accommodate a desk and somewhere maybe that they can work from. And they want to be able to socialize on their own terms. Yep. So they want to watch TV in their room, they can do. They want to, watch TV in their kitchen dining at seated area, they can do,
Yeah.
And that is a very different thing. So without the exceptions allowable, then what you're saying to people is, we no longer want working professionals in our HMOs.
Yeah,
because they won't move there.
Yeah, exactly. So very simple math. So like the 5-bed in that area, let's say the purchase price was 170 grand. We spent 150 on it in total. I'll do a homes end under the hammer scenario where it's just two very simple figures. And so that's 320. Say the value of that property is then worth 360. So making 40 grand profit, you got 5 income streams.
It's about 15%.
It makes sense. That's a reasonable development uplift.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. So that same thing, so we buy it for 170, we're still spending, maybe slightly less because we're taking out an
Right.
ensuite and that's it. But then we're putting more furniture in, say, for the living room. So let's say it's 140. So that's 310. Absolute best case scenario, as a 4-bed, that property is going to be worth, say, £300,000.
Yeah.
Absolute best case. And that's even if you get a commercial valuation, which is harder for that product.
Yeah.
So you're losing money at that point. So you wouldn't really do that development.
No, it doesn't. It's not going to happen, is it?
It's just not going to happen. So in that area, what that means is, and we know this because we talk to a lot of investors, no one is now investing in that area.
Yeah.
So there's no improvement to housing because no one's putting any money into it to improve housing.
It's the exact example of an unintended consequence. We want better things for our people, but we aren't going to consider how people might deliver that.
And the other problem is that not only are people bringing in new stuff through development, because there's limited new supply coming in, there's lack of competition. So what that means is existing, say, HMOs in that area don't need to spend money to upgrade to get to a better housing standard because they've got no competition from.
And they might meet the 7.5 meter square rooms.
They might meet the 7.5 meter standard. So those properties are just getting worse and worse. So there's no incentive for existing owners to upgrade. And this happens in Manchester Council right now, actually.
Yeah.
They have no incentive to upgrade the property to a nicer spec to keep up with the market.
Yeah.
And they've got no incentive to, well, they can't develop because it just doesn't stack up.
We see properties for sale as HMOs in Manchester Council, not Greater Manchester, worth 100 grand more than one that's been purpose built and it's lovely and it's awful.
Yeah.
Just because of where it is.
Yeah, and because there's
no incentive.
They're very strict on planning, aren't they? So I've seen in Manchester City Council, they don't even approve extra occupants and new rooms and extensions and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's no money getting invested into those existing stocks. So it just gets worse over time as a result. And actually they still rent out, even though they're very, very poor. So, and then obviously you get people living in places that are substandard because there's no new investment. So that is the real. So I think in general, when I look at it, these rules to improve housing much more so make it worse.
Yeah, and why, like, the consultation process is ignored. By the way. So I mean, well, we'll be able to come back on this point because Bolton Council are currently doing a consultation on their housing standards, and we've surveyed our tenants.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the results.
Yeah, so we've actually literally what we've said to them, because they're doing the same thing. They're bringing in a housing standard which is, we're happy with 7.5 square meter rooms. You wouldn't need an ensuite. It'd be shared bath scenario, and as long as you have a separate lounge, we will approve that under our licensing scheme. Whereas if you've got 10.2,
which is worse housing in our opinion, and not what the
whereas if you've got a double size standard rooms with an ensuite but it's a shared kitchen diner, we're not going to approve it moving forwards. In which case, it's most of their stock.
Yeah,
right?
what do they do across the whole?
Yeah, so most of the existing stock, when then you turn around and go, well, it doesn't meet the standard. It also discourages the level of but we also want good tenants. We want to attract good tenants into our environment. So you want to create box rooms, because that's what's going to happen is you're going to create box rooms. People are going to come in with these 7.5 square meter rooms just to get it through licensing.
I was literally thinking this the other day because I'm like, all right, we've stamped out Tameside and Bolton. Oh, maybe we just change our standard.
No.
In my head, I'm like, whoa.
Don't do that.
My thought pattern is exactly the thing that we don't want to encourage. But that was my investor mindset key.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're encouraging. And that's us thinking that, we want good quality stuff all the time. So you got lots of other people.
They haven't asked anyone. But this is the whole point of a consultation.
They certainly haven't asked people that work in the space.
Yeah, we will go back with actual points to raise.
Yeah.
And we will see.
Yeah. And also anyone listening to this, I encourage you to reach out and do the consultation with Bolton Council as well if you are in the Greater Manchester area to help with that circumstance, because the landlords do need a voice on what they're actually involved in.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so basically what you're saying to people there is we can no longer accept the thing that you've been delivering for many years.
Yeah.
We want something completely different that's uneconomical. Please go ahead and do that. And everyone's just going to go, well, no.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't make it work. There's no.
Especially when there's other councils that don't have as stringent requirements.
Yeah. So we'll just crystallize what we have. That stock will age. You won't get any improvements. Then you're trying to enforce housing standards to improve those things, and it will just go round and round in circles, rather than having a bit more of a free market economy to help people to compete on a good standard basis.
100%. Yeah.
So how do we do this better then, mate?
Solutions, and that is what we're here for, because we're investors. We're always looking for solutions. We want a better housing and we want to make money, basically. So what do we do, or what should be done, we should say, by the government and councils and things like that? So I'm a big believer that we need to let the market sort itself out to a certain perspective. So the UK has a lot of government intervention. I think the government in general is something like 45% of the overall market of the economy. So it is a huge place of the market, and sometimes it just works well just to let the market work itself out. And what I mean by that is if if you encourage investment, you know, and refurbishment, conversion, new products, things like that, then the poor stuff drops out of the market, or they have to up their game. So let the market decide what's good and not good to a certain perspective. And then I'll build on that as well. So just let the markets decide is point number one. Point number two is, I think we should look more at, say, like functionality on design and actual good design and things like that. Because what I mean by that is you see some tiny homes, you know, on like those shows and things like that are absolutely amazing. They would in no way get approved for planning under a C3 dwelling, but people really like those houses. They're very functional. They work well. On the flip side, you can have a big 40 square meter studio flat that is just terrible. You have 2 cupboards in it, just a big open space and not much else. And that's not good living either. So I think, you know, having design aspects that are a bit more functional, which is a little bit more like licensing, but planning doesn't look at that to the same extent. And then on top of that, because you can develop something and make it nice, and then if it's not maintained and looked after, it can turn bad as well. So I think there could be a bit of like an MOT for housing or something like that. Yeah. It doesn't have to be crazy. Like I've heard some weird stuff like every 5 years you have to replace the kitchen or whatever. No, just do an MOT check, because like it's like cars. If it's working well and it meets the requirements, whether it's old or new, it doesn't matter. It still passes the MOT. So same with a house. If you got like a good functional kitchen, if it's 10 years, 15 years, it doesn't matter as long as it's in good shape and it works well. Or there might be new technologies to say, actually, the oven is old technology now. That's not good for energy or whatever. Take that out, put a new oven in. You know, little pieces like that could be done from a housing MOT. I think that would help, rather than having these blanket rules. I think that definitely for HMOs, if we touch on that, there needs to be alignment between licensing and planning.
I just think there's different standards, like who's going to live in it.
Yeah, like you say, for say a working professional HMO, you'd design it differently to say a student one.
Sticking a lounge in a working professional HMO is pointless.
A lot of the time it's fairly pointless, yeah. Especially if you've got big rooms as well. But for students, they don't mind sharing bathrooms as much, and they probably more so want the social interaction. So separate lounge with, say, a shared bathroom between 2 or 3 people works quite well for students, but working professionals not so much. So why, like I think what you're saying is, why have the same design assessment for a different product?
It's just one category, isn't it? And it's not spending any time to think about the user.
Yeah. So when
design should always be about the user.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah.
So like when you talk about functional design, it should be about the user. You can't have a one-size-fits-all for social working.
It's a good point, actually, because if you're applying for a HMO conversion, you could have students, working professionals, social housing, supported living.
There's 3 or 4 distinct categories, isn't there?
You know, ex-offenders, asylum, all these sort of things. There's lots of different categories, and they all have different requirements and things like that. So you could have a design aspect that works for those sort of things. So I completely agree with that. My other thing is, like, why have rules that are unenforceable? And to give you an example of this, so we're talking about, say, the space standards and rooms and things like that. So you might have a terrace that I was talking about before that doesn't technically comply with, say, a 2-bed terrace now because it's 65 meters and needs to be 70. So on the upper floor, on the planning drawings, they say that's an office or whatever. Yeah. But then anyone can use that as a bedroom.
Well, it's like
permitted development rights.
It's like the 1-bed, 1 occupant rule.
Yeah. No one's going to the house.
I'm going to build this 1-bed flat for 1 person. And then it meets the 1-person guidelines, but I can absolutely guarantee 2 people are going to live in it.
Yeah, and it's unenforceable, so there's no council going to check on that and in doing enforcement. So why put something in there that's
ridiculous?
It's unenforceable?
It is daft, yeah.
So like, if you are going to have space standards, literally it should just be like a 1 bed is this, a 2 bed's this, and just leave it at that. Having a scale of...
Because I think that's where it confuses occupancy and space.
Yes.
100%. You know, and I think that's the way that they've looked at it, which is this is the number of occupants it would support given the space that occupant would need. But the reality is the difference between 1 occupant and 2 occupants is very similar. It's not.
Yeah.
You don't automatically.
But the other thing is if you're an actual couple in a relationship that share a room, the space requirements are different to 2 occupants that have 2 separate rooms as an example. So
yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, so I just think, why have things that are unenforceable or permitted as a rule? It just makes no sense to me. And so my other thing is, if there's an increase, so if you can help increase supply and encourage investment, like actually property could get more affordable as well, because there's more competition, it's good quality stuff. So it just generally helps the market. So encourage investment.
Yeah, and that's the problem with crystallizing any market, isn't it? Because the best is always going to be the best and the worst is always going to be the worst. So if it's unaffordable to do something commercially, then you've just killed your own market and there's no longer a competition environment. And without competition, the bad stuff wins. With competition, the bad stuff loses. So the bad stuff will always get weeded out quickest. The best will always be, the best today might be the mid-table tomorrow. Do you know what I mean? Because the markets evolve and they're always constantly trying to improve themselves. Certainly our designs and stuff over the 5 years we've been in business, they're different.
Yeah, and they get better.
They get better and better and better because the investment's there, the return's there, we can achieve it, Whereas when you eliminate that ability, you just crystallize everything there and then. And that's a critical problem.
And consult with property experts. Like, why the governments and the councils wouldn't consult with property experts?
Housing standards people are not property experts.
Yeah.
I speak to them and they are not property experts.
Yeah, and like I was talking about the design functionality assessment and things like that. Because what I was saying earlier was like, there's some small box bedrooms in London without windows and stuff. Like, obviously part of that design check would be make sure there's X amount of natural light.
And that's the problem, is the housing standards people not being property experts. But what they are experts is in the bottom 5%. Because the bottom 5% is what they see. Because that's
who
the
they get their complaints from and things like that.
So they don't see the top 95%. So what you're doing is you're bringing in housing standards for that percentage. Like we don't get complaints, the councils, from our working professionals.
No.
But they get complaints from HMO and they're bringing all of these things in, but they're alienating these people at the top end.
That's a very good point, actually, because like Article 4 directions came in immediately. I think a lot of their reasoning was because of complaints. But if you actually look at a lot of those complaints, they relate to a certain demographic of people, which isn't the high percentage of what HMOs are being developed as. So if you think 95% of HMO applications for planning would be for, say, what we're doing, working professionals, and the complaints were for a demographic that's not for.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
But then they brought in the rules based on that. So
absolutely. The one thing I would always err on the caution on, because I'm going to bring up one point in terms of better suggestions, is we now live in a world where nothing can escape from the world of media. So we need to police that because everyone's allowed an opinion. But the problem you have is we've seen it. We've seen, if you go onto social media now, there are groups set up to stop planning applications.
Yeah,
specifically there's target planning applications. So you get 200-300 members who object, and then they put pressure onto councillors and they lobby it and that kind of stuff. Planning needs to be put back into the hands of the professionals.
Yes, and that's a reason, again, with the Article 4 directions, because it's so easy on social media for these groups to get hundreds of complaints and things like that. And that's what's forced it to happen in that way. So the issue here is, like, we live in a society, well, theoretically it's supposed to be free speech, isn't it? So people are entitled to their opinion and free speech and stuff like that. But I think the point you're making is that the people who are having a say don't understand the planning aspects and what it actually means. But
I was at a planning committee,
but they're having a big voice.
They did not understand planning.
Yeah,
there was one person in the room that actually had a planning point to raise.
So also for and I don't 100% know this, but if you to become a planning committee member, what do you need to do?
Be a councillor.
A councillor. And how do you become a councillor?
Get elected.
So you have to get elected as a councillor.
Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah.
So in theory, they've been voted to be a councillor, but they haven't necessarily.
They're there to represent their communities. And they should have a say, but they should have a say in developing policy.
Yeah.
Not deciding on individual cases. That should be, we have a policy. This is what we're going to deliver. This is what's already been agreed with by the group of councillors, not, there's these 5 people who've lobbied this one councillor who's then lobbied the other councillor.
It's a bit too political. And so this is how it's outweighed, actually. So if you've got more people in the society that are, say, renting than not renting, then that demographic of people have more of a say.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So
more to say, yeah.
Yeah. And there is a small percentage of landlords and a small percentage of developers. So we're always going to be the minority.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas...
Yeah, again, it's the 5% of bad people in any market. That's who we need to be getting rid of, and you can do that.
But the Labour government said they were going to streamline planning reform and all these sort of things.
Come through over the last week or two, though.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to...
So let's be positive. Hopefully there's something that helps streamline it, make it more efficient. Because
They've certainly gone national with some policies. They haven't said this is no longer a local requirement, it's a national requirement. But it's the local stuff that gets stuck.
Right.
Lovely. There you go.
Truth about housing standards then.
And unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences.
They make it far too expensive. Everyone stops building, and then they blame economy.
So the solution is listen to our thoughts, government, but also as an investor, it creates opportunity because there is limited competition as well.
If you can stack a deal today,
you can get a deal to work and you can do it well. there is limited competition because of those challenges. Yeah.
100%. Right. Thank you very much, Tim. So one more time, if you haven't liked or subscribed and or turned notifications on your platform of choice, please do so to be kept up to date with our next episodes. I hope you enjoyed that. And don't forget to check out on Amazon the Financial Freedom book. You can search for Financial Freedom BDRR, which stands for Buy, Develop, Rent, Refinance. And we will catch you on the next one. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thanks very much.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. If you want to get in touch with us about today's podcast or any of the learning topics that we've gone through today, you can email us at podcast@invest-proc.co.uk or get in touch with us with whichever your social media platform of choice is. If you think you would add value to us as a guest on this podcast, you can please get in touch and let us know what you would be able to talk to us about. Other than that, we wish you well on your financial freedom journeys. And once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.